According to VG charts, Pac-Man World 1 sold decently in North America, and I think it was enough for Namco to give the green light for a sequel. I know VG charts isn't exactly pinpoint accurate, but it can at least give us a rough estimate as to how well the game performed. If I had to guess, Namco probably thought going PlayStation exclusive with the original hindered their overall sales potential, which is why they made the sequel multi-platform. The sequel is also pretty exciting since it came out on next-generation hardware. While Crash and Spyro tried to take advantage of the hardware transition, the result wasn't a substantial leap in graphical fidelity. Pac-Man World 2, on the other hand, feels like it has a lot more production value in terms of early 6th generation visuals, at least in my opinion. Seems the jump also switched the dev team around. It's hard to find out who was included in the dev team just by using Google, so I had to examine the credits of both games. While the original team is more or less still here, a lot of the original developers either left or were replaced by new designers. Scott Rogers, Hardy LaBelle, Mike McLaughlin, and Neil Strudwick seem to all be missing. Ken McCall is back as a programmer instead of a designer, and everyone else is either gone or in the same position. We still have Gil Colgate leading the helm as the lead programmer, Jesse Taylor as the project director, etc. The new level designers are Kyle Mannerberg, Aaron McClay, and Mark Sau. It's important to note that I don't have a ton of knowledge about how games are developed, but I believe the designers draft up the ideas for the levels and how they're constructed, while the programmers execute that idea. In this sense, Pac-Man World 2 had most of the same quality programmers from the first game, and switched up its level designers for a reason that will be forever unknown. Perhaps Namco wanted it to feel more fresh or more ambitious, so they set up a new team of designers to spearhead a new project. This isn't to say that a switch up is a bad thing, just that you ought to expect some changes in design compared to the original Pac-Man world. That said, what is different between these two? Let's find out. Time to review Pac-Man World 2. I originally wanted to release this video on Halloween, and the reason for that is the game's story. Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde are all fucking around in Pac Village and accidentally awaken a big bad ghost named Spooky, who strikes a deal with the ghosts to take over Pac-Land and destroy their dreaded enemy Pac-Man. So Pac-Man has to travel the world to take back the golden fruit that the ghosts stole in order to combat Spooky and seal him back under the tree where he came from. Pretty standard, but it would have made for a great not Halloween video. I think Pac-Man World 1 worked fine as a not Halloween video, and honestly I was giving myself way too much credit planning out this retrospective. I am not good with time management, which is why my scripts fluctuate in length so damn much. Meta commentary aside, I think the story is serviceable, and you probably don't care about my opinion of the story of a 3D platformer because it doesn't fucking matter. On to shit that does matter. Considering the switch up in the dev team, it's surprising that so many aspects of the original carry over to Pac-Man World 2. Pac-Man can butt bounce and rev roll, same as before, and can use them in similar ways. Press floor buttons, break boxes, roll up inclines, and roll on movable platforms. Although strangely, there are much less movable platforms. I think I came across one or two, and they weren't even used to good effect. In fact, if they were removed, the game would be no better or worse for it. I don't see its absence as a bad thing necessarily, since there was only so much you could do with it in the first place, but I did like the utility it gave the rev roll. You still use the rev roll to great effect in this installment, but its applications are almost exclusively to get Pac-Man somewhere across a long distance that he couldn't walk. We already know about getting up inclines, but it's also used to get him across gaps in the floor or to blitz him across ice that he can't walk across because he'd slide right down. The last one is essentially an incline, but in a different way due to the change from a static camera to a manual camera. The butt bounce is still used to kill enemies and pound buttons, which can lead you to backtrack chains to press buttons you already passed or to open up pack dot chains to secret areas. The pack pellet throw is gone for seemingly no reason, version, and it's replaced with the kickflip, which is practically useless unless there's a box floating in the air on a parachute for some inexplicable reason. It feels a bit contrived, and they never expand the ability beyond its surface level applications, but the pack pellet throw wasn't exactly top-notch either, so I'm willing to leave it at that. Unfortunately, the kickflip doesn't offer anything in the way of dealing with enemies. Either you're going to be butt-bouncing enemies, or you're going to rev roll into something and then butt-bounce it. Enemies don't feel as threatening or interesting to take out. The only time you need to use the kickflip to damage something is in the fight with Spooky. Even level objectives generally remain the same, with the same fruit and pack pellet collection system that contribute to a high score. You can sometimes find pack pellet mazes with ghosts to chomp on in the levels, and you'll find hidden Galaxians to enter traditional Pac-Man mazes that you collect to play back at the main menu, or in this case, the game's hub level. There are new collectibles in the form of tokens that unlock various titles from Pac-Man's library, like Pac-Attack, Pac-Mania, Ms. Pac-Man, and the original Pac-Man. I'm a huge fan of subtle stuff like this. It's the reason I really like the GameCube port of Sonic Adventure, which let you play a lot of old Sonic games. Not only is it a cool place to experience the mascot's history, it's pretty good value for your money. Value in a day and age where GameCube emulation is near flawless is kinda irrelevant, but at the time it was pretty damn novel, and it makes me think the developers wanted people to get their money's worth. I respect that. Here's where we start branching away from Pac-Man World to discuss some of the liberties the sequel has taken. The most obvious change is one from a static camera to a manual camera, a la a change from Crash Bandicoot to Mario 64, although it isn't as radical as you would initially think. The levels are still very similar to Pac-Man World, even though they had to be constructed to work in an environment where a freeform camera is applicable. The connection comes through the linear progression and supplementary non-linear exploration through limited backtracking and secret areas. The camera has just decided to stay behind Pac-Man instead of to the side. I get the feeling the designers wanted to focus more on the spectacle and graphical prowess of the GameCube, and using a by-the-side camera wasn't going to produce the same level of excitement and immersion as a camera that's fully 3D. I would agree that a freeform camera and level design that revolves around that is more immersive than a by-the-side camera more reminiscent of 2D. Yet, the team probably didn't expect the challenge that would come with trying to design a game around a fully controllable camera. I already mentioned in my previous video the problems with a fully controllable camera, all of which are present in Pac-Man World 2, unfortunately. There were so many damn times where the camera gets stuck on a wall and can't move any further to the left or right, and many of those times were during crucial platforming sections where vision was key. I can't tell you how many times I failed a jump because I simply couldn't see what the fuck I was doing. It really does feel like I'm wrestling for control of the camera, and I hate that. It's really apparent in the tighter levels like Into the Volcano or Night Crawling. It's a shame I had so many problems with the camera because it opened up a lot of cool opportunities. The ice skating gimmick is on the front of the box, further convincing me the game was more about spectacle and cool set pieces. This really wouldn't be possible without the front-facing camera, at least to the same effect. You wouldn't be able to do something like this from the side and make it feel as special or immersive. I would also argue you don't need a fully controllable camera for this, and honestly the camera doesn't suffer from the same control issue in the levels like Blade Mountain, Scuba Duba, Shark Attack, Yellow Pac-Marine, and Haunted Boardwalk. It functions exceptionally well in these stages because it never requires direct control. Pac-Man is always going forward. I think the camera shows its greatest strength in levels like Bedoying Woods, Treewood Forest, and Butane Pain. Bedoying Woods introduces a cool gimmick with the butt bounce based around platforms that launch Pac-Man into the air. It's a really cool level theme through all three of the forest levels, and it feels natural to use. It really wouldn't work without the camera taking control away and focusing a 90-degree angle towards the ground. This way you have a full grasp of where Pac-Man is going to land, and it works infinitely better than a drop shadow. Yet I really do think the pads themselves are lacking despite how well they work. They aren't developed enough for me to feel like they evolve. It's pretty cool to look at yourself flying high into the air, but they don't do anything meaningful with the platforms. Sometimes they space them out, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I would have liked to see some switchable bounce platforms with spikes on them to keep the tension up and make you time your jumps carefully. Or perhaps pull a Mario Galaxy and have some of them disappear while others reappear. I feel the same way about something like the bounce pads that bounce you in a certain direction. They're nothing but spectacle. You never have a decision to make when bouncing on them outside of timing your bounce correctly, which is frankly an elementary gaming skill. This strikes me as something you could use to good effect in a 2D plane, where you put floating hazards in between the directional pads and make you time your butt bounce to avoid hitting the obstacles. This could probably work in 3D too, with enough effort in QA, but the designers probably weren't thinking too intently about challenge escalation. That isn't to say the game isn't hard. In fact, it can be pretty challenging. A lot of the difficulty is pretty fair, revolving around basic platforming and trusting you to not fall into bottomless pits. I think the best example of simple challenge escalation is one of my favorite levels, Haunted Boardwalk. I'd quickly like to take a moment to highlight this brilliantly spooky level theme. The game's soundtrack was done by either David Logan or Yas Noguchi. I'm really not sure which. If it's worth anything, David Logan is in the credits and Yas Noguchi isn't, so I'm just gonna stick with David Logan. Anyway, whoever you are, you do such an excellent job capturing the feel of an expansive world from a joyous grassy plain to an adventurous journey up an icy mountain, to an expansive aquatic journey to Spooky's Island, It's really great stuff, and although I can't say it tops Pac-Man World 1 for me, I don't really think I can say Pac-Man World 1 tops this either. I love them both. Back to my point, Haunted Boardwalk is not just musically and visually interesting, its level design is simplistic genius. It uses rollerblades as a mechanic to traverse boardwalks. At first it's pretty easy, and you just make some simple jumps to get used to the mechanic. Next, they make the boardwalk start sinking as soon as you land on it. Now you're juggling simple jumps with sinking boardwalks. Then they stop the boardwalks from sinking, but make the jumps a lot tighter. You need to measure your distance carefully or you'll fall. Finally, they mix the tight jumps with the sinking boardwalks to really get your blood pumping. It's a great challenge escalation. It's even harder if you're going after all the collectibles, and unfortunately this is where many of the game's issues start to pop up. 100% wasn't really quantified in Pac-Man World, but you generally knew when you had everything the level had to offer. In this way, it was more about racking up a huge high score for more lives, and also to keep the platforming as fun as it could be. The exploration for fruit and pack pellets was essential to the design of the first game, and it was one of the things that cemented it as one of my favorite platformers. Pac-Man World 2 attempts to emulate this with the same collection system and giving you the chance to backtrack every now and then in similar ways to its predecessor. For example, you press a button in Bedoring Woods that prompts you to press a button you previously passed over. This is one of the sections where the camera strikes a brilliant compromise between the new freeform and the old static by following Pac-Man from the side of a tree, while also revolving around the tree to keep up with him. It's easy to tell where he is at all times, and I wish the camera was always like this. Unfortunately, moments like this aren't present often enough, and when they do surface, they just don't offer the same joy of taking a fruit and opening a door you previously couldn't. Sometimes they force you to backtrack in a level like Volcanic Panic, and the camera just isn't very cooperative. Take this instance where you need to ledge climb to an area and jump back and forth between the ledges as prompted. A cool way to evolve the ledge climbing mechanic, I'll give you that, but it's made a lot worse when you have to backtrack through the same area and the camera doesn't switch around. So you have to do the same challenge but with the camera in an inconvenient position, leaving you open to fireballs you can't see coming. This in a game where backtracking is often ignored by providing you a much simpler way back via floating pack pellet chains, or simply by offering you a power-up to make the trek back easier. 100% in general is not as advisable. There are so many fucking collectibles in this game that it feels like a proper collectathon. Take Canyon Chaos as an example. 14 cherries, 8 strawberries, 8 oranges, 5 apples, 3 melons, a Galaxian, 178 pack pellets, and 8 tokens, not including the bonus tokens. Compare that to a level in Pac-Man World where you rarely ever collected 5 of the same fruit, and most of them were placed strategically around doorways to be used up in a fashion not unlike a key. Collection does not serve a sufficient enough purpose in Pac-Man World 2. The closest you get is a bonus token upon achieving 100%, meaning there are 18 tokens you can get by 100%ing every level. There are 189 tokens, and to achieve the highest reward level, you have to collect 180. This would mean you would need to complete at least half of the levels in the game if you decided to go after every token hidden in the levels and beat the time trials, which also reward you with tokens. All of this to play Ms. Pac-Man, whoop-de-fucking-do. I mentioned that it's cool when games package classic games in as rewards, and I do admit the rewards here are pretty cool. Alongside the games, there's a sound test and a museum full of pre-production artwork. Though, when that's the only incentive to achieve completion, I begin to hesitate. High scores no longer reward extra lives. Fruits generally just unlock boxes that give you more fruit, and there is no true 100% bonus at the end of the road. There wasn't one for Pac-Man World 1 either, but that game had an extra incentive to back up its exploration. Pac-Man World 2 has an unnecessarily long list of collectibles that are usually not very fun to collect. The times when they're on the ground emulating a pack pellet maze, they're harmless. However, when they start to lay the pack pellets in an arc to simulate you jumping over a platform, it gets incredibly tedious to collect the damn things. They have such a small hitbox, and they did such a poor job with the jump arc in stages like Ice River Run that I was constantly jumping back and forth between platforms to collect one measly pack pellet that doesn't amount to anything in the grand scheme of things. It gets even worse in Ghost Bayou, where there is a line of pack pellets on sinking boardwalks. Except the problem with this section in particular is that the pack pellets are set up in that way forever, so when the boardwalk starts sinking, you need to jump to get them individually because you often jump too high to collect them all in one burst. Even if you do manage to get all of them by some miracle, you won't have the height on the boardwalk required to make this insanely tight jump to the next boardwalk. How you're supposed to ever 100% this level while still keeping your sanity is beyond me. That isn't even to mention the levels that make backtracking an impossibility. I'm talking about stuff like Avalanche Alley, Blade Mountain, Scuba Duba, Shark Attack, and Yellow Pack Marine. I have not and probably never will 100% these levels because of how tedious they make it to backtrack. If you miss something, unless you're able to circle back around in the nick of time in Blade Mountain, you're screwed. You need to kill yourself to respawn at the last checkpoint to try again. This is because the game expects you to do one clean run through the level. If you happen to miss, one fruit in a level, you can't just go back in, collect that one fruit, and call it a day. You need to go in and do 100% all over again for it to even matter. I think one of the most baffling things about this is that Pac-Man World 2 is essentially a full-blown collectathon now. There is so much to find in these levels that it's no longer able to disguise itself the same way Pac-Man World 1 did. You need a checklist in these levels in order to keep track of the laundry list of collectibles you need. And they give this to you after you beat the damn level. And even after you beat the level, going back in, you're only ever able to see what collectibles you've picked up and not the grand total. Why the fuck not? There's no reason to hide something like this unless you're trying to pad out 100% and make it as annoying as it can possibly fucking be. Sure, the messages telling you that you collected all the melons might help, but you also can't reaffirm this by pausing, so if you forget, tough luck. I started my fresh playthrough of this game trying to go for 100%, and I shit you not, the first level I got absolutely everything except for one damn melon. This was a theme throughout my playthrough. I would get just close enough to 100% that I could taste it, but I would fall just short. There were a few levels I ended up 100%ing, but eventually I just gave up. Blade Mountain was too much of a pain in the ass, and the water world? No fucking thank you. It isn't worth my time to fully complete the levels in this game. What I would suggest is to not even fucking bother. You don't get anything out of it. You don't get a fun challenge, you don't get a reward, so really what's the point? This, in my opinion, is perhaps the biggest failure of Pac-Man World 2 as a sequel to Pac-Man World 1. If World 2 wanted to become its own thing by focusing more on the spectacle, it really should have ditched collectibles as a concept, or at least made them more fucking manageable. This is not a game designed around collectibles, considering the number of levels that won't let you go back for the damn things. I recognize that huge rant I just went on was for something completely optional, but I'm not going to take that as an excuse to pardon it. Especially when the previous game made it a point that going out of your way for collectibles was not only fun, but a nice way to keep your life counter stocked. There is no excuse for the sequel to fall so short. I'm not sure if I've ever said this in a video, but I think Crash 2 is a great game. One of my favorite platformers.
This footage is not mine, it's from Retrospective Zone, who also makes really cool YouTube videos critiquing video games. It also probably sounds really shit right now because I'm whispering into my mic and I'm recording in my room because this is a last minute audio record. Anyway, this is not mine, I'm not plagiarizing, but please go subscribe to Michael Hardman of the Retrospective Zone. Trust me, you won't be disappointed.
Some of you might know that Crash is guilty of many similar things. The system of box gems is required for completion. Break every box in a level and you collect a box gem at the end of the level. However, it doesn't save your progress, you need to do a clean run. From what I've just outlined, it would seem that I would automatically hate Crash's completion system. Alas, I do not work in black and white. I really enjoy Crash 2's system. It's by no means perfect, but it gives me enough of a rush that I enjoy breaking boxes for the damn gem. It comes down to a few simple points. Firstly, it's fun as fuck to break boxes. They make satisfying sound effects, they're fun to hunt for, and they give you more Wumpa fruit, which are fun to collect not just for the amazing sound effect, but for the extra lives. Secondly, the levels feel built for exploration. They're very corridor-like linear, and the boxes are usually in your way. They might go out of your way to hide a few, but that's okay with me. As far as I'm concerned, finding the damn things is half the fun. I do agree with a lot of people that some parts of the collection in that game are not well implemented. Sometimes you have to go against the camera, that's annoying. Some levels are borderline too cryptic with their secrets, that's annoying. However, for the vast majority of levels, I was able to take up the challenge. And you know what? It was fun. I wanted to explore every level to the fullest, and I had a blast. Not so much with World 2. The crucial difference is the lack of incentive. It does still feel good to collect fruit and pack pellets, but not nearly enough for me to justify how much I need to go out of my way for the excruciating number of them. It was fun in the first few levels, but it takes so long that it drained me too much for me to end up caring in the end. There are usually more pack pellets in a typical level of this game than there are boxes to smash in a Crash 2 level, and that's not even including the number of fruit. It's not as if the levels in World 2 are longer than the ones in Crash 2 or anything. They're about equal in length, it's just that it can feel long as fuck when you're going after completion. When you aren't, the game feels like it's fucking nothing. The first two worlds are a complete joke, it's laughable. I guess I might as well talk about the levels themselves for a change instead of the optional shit you can do in them. Level design in this game is pretty hit or miss for me, with thankfully enough hits that I don't dwell too much on some of the questionable aspects. I already showed how much I enjoy Haunted Boardwalk, and another reason for that is the roller skates. It injects variety while keeping the game about platforming, which is something I can get behind. I understand the need for the game to feel more like an adventure, so injecting some variety can ultimately end up helping a game feel less repetitive. I certainly felt the repetition in the first game, so seeing the team attempt to remedy this is admirable. This is why I think so many of the levels are designed around cool set pieces or gimmicks. You do have your straightforward platforming levels like Canyon Chaos or Into the Volcano, but then you have stuff like Bedoing Woods with the crazy bouncy camera angles, and levels like Blade Mountain where you have to ice skate down the mountain and use momentum and precision jumps to avoid falling into the icy insta-death water. I'm fine with stuff like this to liven up the feeling of a platformer. In fact, I think the first 3 worlds are pretty damn strong provided you're at least trying to get 100% to get the most out of the level. I know that's contradictory to what I said previously, but if you're just playing the level straight, it feels too boring. It's almost worth it to just go after whatever you can collect, and not pay attention to the percentage after you beat the level. Just go after whatever you find and you'll have the most fun. At least I did. Never venture beyond that, for the sake of your sanity, especially Blade Mountain and beyond. Anyway, levels. The first world focuses on platforming and easing you into the game. The second world introduces some cool set pieces in the form of bounce pads and tree branches. And the third world plays around with all sorts of things, like climbing up a mountain with ice physics, running away from a giant snowball, and running down a mountain on ice skates. Outside of the 100% gripes I have with them, they're all perfectly fine levels. Once I got to the fourth world, the design of the levels got a little bit shaky. Into the Volcano was pretty okay, with a cool gimmick revolving around platforms that fall down in a direction when you step on them. It suffers from a lot of the claustrophobic camera issues, and there's a really stupid oversight with the falling platforms, wherein if you grab onto the sides of them with the ledge grab, you're absolutely dead. I'm serious, there's no way to get back on because Pac-Man takes a while to hoist himself up, so he ends up just re-grabbing the ledge every time until you eventually die. Thankfully that doesn't happen too often, and I think the precision platforming makes up for this a bit. It's an okay level. I feel similarly about Volcanic Panic and Magma Opus. There's some cool stuff with the metal power-up to negate lava, and even a cool instance with branching pathways. Can imagine that makes 100% pretty fun. There's a cool mechanic in Volcanic Panic that involves lowering the lava level by doing a bunch of platforming challenges that are pretty fun, except for that section with the shitty camera. This level uses pretty much every ability Pac-Man has to a cool extent. I enjoy the level for that reason. The rev roll perhaps gets the most varied use, with movable platforms and indents you have to rev roll onto to get across gaps to other platforms. There is a bit of a weird section where the lava rises and it makes 100% a bitch, but outside of that, it's a pretty cool level. Magma Opus is perhaps my least favorite because of the end section, which freaks out the camera and plays with the physics in a way that is pretty damn confusing. You're supposed to roll down the slopes, but sometimes the camera will angle in a weird way and the physics don't make a whole lot of sense. I swear sometimes I'm holding in the direction I want to go, but it just doesn't happen right away. It's infuriating. Basically, Into the Volcano is okay, Volcanic Panic is pretty fun, and Magma Opus is decent until the end. A bit janky, but I got through it. The next world kinda baffles me, and I think I have the most mixed emotions about it compared to any other world. So the idea of having 3 levels dedicated entirely to swimming is a bit scary, especially considering the original didn't do swimming all that well. I mean, especially considering most 3D platformers don't do that well. Even for the sake of variety, it seems like a bit much to have that many levels dedicated to swimming instead of platforming-focused level themes like the rest of the game. However, the swimming levels are pretty well designed. You're constantly moving forward through the ocean, and you can adjust your vertical and horizontal directions while moving forward to move out of the way of obstacles or collect fruit, pack pellets, and extra lives. You also have a boost button to give you some speed to clear some tight sections of bombs or boxes. While it's nothing exciting, it functions without a hitch, and it's more than I can say about most water sections in 3D platformers. That being said, it's not something I find particularly memorable, or something I'd ever want to go back to. I'd probably skip these levels if I had the choice. I would especially skip Yellow Pac-Marine, which I find annoying. The gimmick is that Pac-Man is in a submarine. It's sort of like Star Fox, but underwater. However, you can only shoot 6 missiles at a time until they recharge. The missiles also shoot pretty damn slowly. It's a poor man's Star Fox in every sense of the word. It's pretty hard to see past your large submarine model, you can't shoot at enemies rapidly because your missiles recharge and shoot slowly. It's just not particularly fun. Most of the time I just found it frustrating to attempt to maneuver myself in front of an enemy submarine to try seeing if the missile will hit while subsequently bumping into a missile that was hard to see coming because the submarine is so damn huge. The water world is generally a huge drag for me, and Haunted Boardwalk is a great way to relieve my boredom once I'm finally finished with the water world. Night crawling functions a lot like Into the Volcano in that the platforming is pretty tight and engaging, but the camera has a tendency to give you strange angles and get stuck on walls while you're trying to make precision jumps. The maze section is too far zoomed in, and it doesn't turn fast enough to properly see the spiders that roam around, so it feels like you really need to slow down in this section, and it just doesn't feel natural. Similarly, there's a section where you just need to know that you're supposed to rev roll across a ridiculously large gap because you'd done it probably once before in the lava world or something. There wasn't a sufficient build-up to know, it just looked like there were bounce pads that I hadn't activated yet. Luckily, since I have experience with this game, I knew what to do, but that doesn't excuse it being a stupid design choice. Another fun thing is that you need certain fruit to progress, and you'll be glad to know that when I tried to play the game ignoring collectibles, I ran into a bit of an issue. There is no reason for this bounce pad to not just be there, for this movable platform to not just be there. I looked everywhere for a way to open the box, but I must have gone too far. I had to exit the level. Why would you design your level like this when collection is clearly not a priority? Finally, Ghost Bayou has an interesting concept. It's a maze where you have to follow certain paths to try to find the exit via a lot of backtracking and exploration. It's pretty cool if you aren't going for 100%, as it can really feel like a maze even if it isn't enclosed. There are a few annoyances, like Wormwood forcing you to kill a set number of skeletons before time runs out, but other than that, it's a fun level. It encourages you to explore, not just walk from one end to the other. The levels I don't particularly enjoy are most of the water world and a few levels in the volcano world. The rest I either love, like, or think to be okay. I'd say the levels offer a somewhat clean difficulty curve. Each world gave me somewhat of a challenge, and each world was progressively harder. I do think the difficulty curve is pretty bipolar when it comes to 100%, but on a normal playthrough it's pretty solid. There was enough placed in my way to test me that I never had an abundance of lives on my first playthrough, which is a good indicator the game has a respectable level of challenge. There is something to be said as to how mindless the game can feel when not going after fruit. It feels like the levels were sometimes designed to be collectathons because the normal run through a level feels incredibly boring. Not all the time, there are certainly moments in the levels that shine because of how cool the platforming is, but a lot of my continued enjoyment with the game is collectible based, even if it's not 100% based. God, now I'm just confusing myself with this play philosophy. Whatever, not a huge concern. There are still cool moments like sliding down ice patches and making a precise butt bounce onto a bounce pad, or something like escaping rising lava. But a lot of the beginning worlds feel like simple platforming without the drive to explore that was always present for me in the first game. The bosses don't really help. Blinky's frog is piss easy, just bounce his wooden tongue a bunch until he wises up with a metal tongue and you simply rev roll into his mouth. Good job, Blinky. Inky's Blade-O-Matic is similarly easy. You can just damage him by rev rolling, so all you have to do is keep rev rolling and avoiding the simplistic saw blades he shoots at you. Pinky's Revenge and Clyde in the Caldera are a bit harder, but revolve around a huge waiting game. I need to wait for Pinky to stop shooting so she can move into position for me to rev roll her. Similarly, I need to wait for Clyde to stop shooting fireballs so he can go down to a platform so I can butt bounce his endlessly shrinking hitbox. It's pretty damn boring, even if it is harder. I mean, for Christ's sakes, the last 3 bosses are exactly the same. They could have just mashed it all into one to make it feel less repetitive. First phase would be like Inky, the second phase would be like Pinky, and the third phase would be like Clyde. That would be a cool boss, and the entire battle wouldn't be a waiting game. Whale on a Sub suffers from the nuisance that is the submarine, although funnily enough, it's probably the easiest thing to do in the submarine. And while Spooky doesn't quite live up to Talkman in terms of having a cool fight that tests what you've learned, it does make good use of the kickflip, and a lot of Spooky's spells are fun to avoid, like the enemies he shoots, the blasts, and the fire that follows behind you. Overall, the only boss I really enjoy fighting is Spooky. I realize World 1 wasn't perfect, but it was certainly better than this limp dick selection of terrible boss fights. The design philosophy of Pac-Man World 2 is to wow the player with cool set pieces and gimmicks, and using that to enhance the platformer overall and make it feel more memorable, immersive, and adventurous. I think the game is able to pull this off on next generation hardware very well. Outside of some texture work, I suppose, the game just looks gorgeous today, and it makes platforming look really cool. I mentioned bounce pads, but doing something like skating down a mountain and exploring a volcano is pretty awesome. Now, the level themes are pretty boring. The original had a pirate beach, a space level, a fun house, a spooky themed level. Pac-Man World 2 has a grassy plain, a treetop forest, an ice level, a lava level, a water level, you get the picture. It's slightly mundane, although it is pretty cool that the spooky themed level returns for the ending, as it's almost second nature to have something scary be the ultimate challenge for Pac-Man. Although Pac-Man World 2 is able to realize its philosophy pretty well, it brings with it a lot of challenges I mentioned previously. It has a hit or miss camera, a few weird levels that rely too much on gimmicks and not enough on platforming, and less focus on level exploration that was so key to the success of the original. It does feel cool to go on an adventure through the world of this game, but it doesn't feel as satisfying as a pure platformer. It has a lot of variety, but it doesn't truly have enough time to flesh out all of its concepts. The abilities feel slightly underutilized, and level themes don't stick around long enough for them to be evolved in the same way the original was. The level gimmicks feel like coatings so that each world feels unique and memorable, which in itself is a plus. Maybe Pac-Man World 2 is a bit less repetitive, but I ultimately think I prefer the direction of Pac-Man World. It's a lot less ambitious, a bit less immersive, and a bit less adventurous, but the platforming was tight. It focused on what it did best, had one of the most solid difficulty curves out there, incentivized exploration like no other platformer, and did a bang-up job making level obstacles evolve with your skill. At the end of the day, even though Pac-Man World 2 did a good job being a spectacle, it still could have improved a few of its shortcomings while not becoming a carbon copy of the original. Fix some of the camera issues, make 100% feel less obnoxious or less of a priority, and focus a bit more on the platforming without sacrificing the variety of the stage gimmicks. This game missed a huge opportunity to combine its visually interesting elements with the tight design of the first game. You can compromise between both and evolve Pac-Man World as a result, but I don't think that happened here. I just think Pac-Man World 2 is a bit of a step down. It's still pretty good, and I'd recommend it to most people, but it just doesn't reach the same heights for me as Pac-Man World. With that, I conclude part 2 of my Pac-Man World retrospective. We're basically 2 for 2 at this point, so let's hope the Black Sheep Pac-Man World 3 delivers something that isn't awful, because I've heard some bad things. Oh well. I mean, Donald Trump's the president of the United States now. Anything can happen. I hope you enjoyed the video. My name has been KingK, and you should certainly have yourself some well-deserved fun today.